Hi guys, and welcome to Total Technik. Today working on the Audi Q7, and we're going to be doing a full brake disc and pad change on the Brembo style fixed caliper. Let's get it done. So first thing we want to do, obviously for any brake job, is we need to remove the wheel. So let's do that. Now before you jack the car up, what you need to do is slacken off your wheel nuts. The reason being is that if you jack the car up first and then try and undo these wheel nuts, the whole wheel will try to turn. Whereas if you do it whilst the weight is still pushing the wheel down to the floor, then you can just slacken these off without moving the whole wheel. So what you want to do is literally half a turn, and then repeat that for each of the wheel nuts, literally half a turn, no more than that. And then the next stage is we'll jack it up, take the weight off, and then we can get the wheel removed completely. So now what we've done, we're ready to remove the wheel bolts completely. So we've lifted the car up just a little bit further, so we've got a gap between the floor and the wheel. And now we just want to get each of these wheel bolts removed in turn. Obviously if you've got an air gun or an impact wrench or something like that, this is the ideal opportunity to use it. Otherwise you can do it old-fashioned way like I am here. And with all of the wheel bolts removed, we'll do a little bit of a wobble and then just slide it forward and put that to one side. So let's have a quick look at how this type of caliper works. It's slightly different to the more traditional type of caliper that you might be used to working on. This is actually fixed. So this is a one-part frame, unlike a kind of a single piston caliper which has a frame with a separate bracket. This is all in one unit. So if you look at it from the end here, what we've got is we've got the two brake pads. There are a few variations, but the same principle applies to all of this type of caliper. So here's your two pads. So you've got these little stop ends on them. So you've got pads. That's the pad backing, goes all the way down. So that's one big pad in there, and obviously there's your second pad in there. You'll notice this large pin that travels through the centre. This is where the variation occurs. Sometimes rather than having one big pin through the centre, where these kind of curves are, you'll have two smaller pins rather than a centre pin, and sometimes you'll have all three. You'll have a centre pin and outer pins. If you have these outer pins, usually these just tap out. So you would get a small punch tool and tap it gently on the end. That would start to slide it back, and then you can press this down and remove that from the rear, and then once that second one's removed, do the same and again press it down and pull that out. We don't have that today on this particular one. This is the spring clip, so this goes underneath your pins, and this basically presses keeps pressure downwards on the pads, stops the pads coming back out. When you buy your new brake pad set that we'll be looking at in a moment, a little bit further into the video, you'll be seeing that the set that we've got comes with brand new replacement clips, so that's a good thing to do as well. The brake pad wear sensor, have a quick look at that as well. It actually slots into the brake pad, a little cutout on the brake pad on the outer pad there, and this cable tucks in here, comes around here, tucks in here, and there's actually that's the electrical connector right there. The other thing to mention as well, as you'll see later in the video, is that these have two bleed nipples. Got one right here, and you've got another one directly on the opposite side right there. So you've got two rather than one, and that obviously corresponds to each of the sets of pistons, as you'll see as we dismantle this. So that's the kind of basic principle of how it works. So let's start getting it dismantled. Okay, so once your wheel is off, what you want to do is hop in and just turn your steering wheel so that the hub face turns outwards like this. That's going to give you obviously much better access working here than it would be if it was turned all the way on the inside there. So first thing we're going to do is we've got the wear sensor cable for the brake pads here, and this actually comes up and the electrical connector is right here, so you need to get that disconnected first of all. Now it sits in a little bracket, and it's got little hooked arms that kind of come around the outside of it and kind of sit it in quite snug, top and bottom, so it can be a little bit tricky to get out. The easiest way is, rather than use the clip down the bottom, I'm not going to get a click on that, is if you come down the front, you can just lift up the little, it's like a little plate. I'll show it to you once the plug's out. You see, as I twist that, it lifts it, so I'm just going to gently twist that there and start to give the whole thing, there he comes, a little bit of a wiggle, like so. You see there's a little catch there, that's what you need to lift it over. If you look down inside, all I was doing is just put my screwdriver in there, and I was just literally lifting this up to disconnect it from this little catch there. So went in, pushed it forward. So just a quick reference for you for the routing of this this cable. Obviously it attaches here, comes through, and it's like a little kind of lasso built into the bleed nipple cap just there. And then it feeds through this little hole that's built into the side of the caliper, comes down into a clip on the spring there, and then down and seated into its final place just there. So what's actually holding these brake pads in is this this kind of H-shaped kind of spring clip that we have just here. And this is held down by this pin that goes right through the centre. Actually passes through the caliper here, through brake pad 1 there, across the spring clip, through brake pad 2, through the body of the caliper again, and has a bolt on this end. So to remove this, what we're going to do is we're going to have to undo the bolt on the end, and then we're going to have to tap it back through in this direction, and so the whole pin will come out in this direction here towards the outside. So as we can see on our pin, we've got a kind of bit of corrosion. These brakes should have probably been changed a little while ago. So what I'm going to do to help aid the process of getting this pin out, because I suspect this is going to be quite tricky to get out, it's going to give it a little bit of a clean up around the actual pin on both sides. And also what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some dismantling fluid like plus gas, liquid wrench, and PB blasters, 100 different types of a product. I'm just carefully going to put this in, and hopefully that's going to seep into this gap here and make it, and the same on this side, to make it easier to get this pin out, especially if it is slightly corroded, as this one is, which is going to be quite a tight fit. Usually doesn't matter so much on the holes around the actual pads themselves, because the holes in the pads tend to be larger than the holes on the outside. But that's what you want to do, give these a bit of a clean up if yours aren't looking so hot like these aren't, and then put some spray on them as well. So for our bolt here, it's a size 13. Now on this type of pin, because it's not a solid pin, it's got a hole in the middle that the bolt fits into. If you kind of have a look on the end of it, just there, you'll see that it's the wall of it's quite thin. So when you come to tap this out and you get your punch, whatever size punch it might be, what you don't want to be doing is trying to hit this, because obviously that's either going to go into the hole or damage the outside of it. So to start this moving, what we want to do is actually put this back in. And then you want to hit the head of this to start it moving. And then obviously as you hit that with the hammer, that space will decrease, because the end of the pin will start to be pushed out, and you can undo it a little bit more, hit it a little bit more. The problem is when you get near the end of it, if you get a bit of a stubborn bolt, you don't want to be hitting it when you've only got a tiny bit of the thread. Hopefully this one won't be too bad, but if you do get a stubborn one, you might want to have a look around the workshop and see if you can find one that has the same thread pattern but is longer, because then that will allow you to screw that in and knock the whole thing out of place. So yeah, this one's quite stubborn, unfortunately, so we've got a little bit of corrosion that we'll clean up later. But as you can see, we've pushed it all the way through now. We're just by the second brake pad now. So what we're going to do is, rather than hammer it from this end, we've now got a little bit of a lip there. So we'll grab the punch and we'll just finish it off from this side. Just make sure that your cable's unhooked from the spring clip. You push the cable all the way down, just bring this over the lip here. You should have enough space just to pop that out. So So for the removal of these pads, we're going to want to take a little bit of the pressure off of the pistons. And to do that, what we've got to do is retract the pistons back into the caliper just a little bit to slide these out. We actually want to pull them back quite a bit because we're going to be fitting in nice new chunky pads later on. And so we actually want them kind of pushed all the way back in. And there's a couple of different ways of doing that. The way that we're going to be doing it today is the Audi workshop way. Let's have a quick discussion on the two different ways of doing it. So when you force the pad back and force the pistons back, what that does is it's going to force the brake fluid back up the pipes and back towards the master cylinder. That's one way of doing it. You can literally do these with your fingers, or you can even put a small screwdriver down in there and just use that to gently lever that back, and you will be able to pull that back. But that will pump the brake fluid back, and that's kind of the kind of traditional way of doing it. And most kind of brake jobs tend to be done that way. The argument for that is they say you could be pushing dirty brake fluid back into the system, and the other argument is if your brake fluid reservoir has been topped up, obviously, if it would have been on the factory setting, on the perfect setting, and as these have worn down, then your brake fluid reservoir would have gone down slightly to compensate for that, because you've got more fluid in the calipers. If you then top that up, when you squeeze it back out, you're going to flood the brake fluid reservoir, and it'll overflow into the engine bay. That's the arguments against it. And the Audi Workshop Manual recommends you don't do it that way. They recommend that what you do is you actually connect your brake bleeder onto the brake nipples here and here. And as you rewind them back, instead of the brake fluid being pumped back up into the system, it'll come out of your pipe here, and you can collect it, and then you can just top up at the end of the job as required. So that's the way that we're going to be doing it today. So what we want to do is just carefully release the caps on both of the bleed nipples. So today we're going to be using this little homemade brake bleeder tool just to collect the leftover brake fluid. You can spend quite a lot of money on these tools. If you're interested in one of these, we've done a video on how to make one of these for virtually nothing, and we'll add a link for you in the information section below. Okay, now for loosening these off, they're size 11 usually. Traditionally use a ring spanner. The only problem with these is if you're worried this is going to be tight, or might have some gunk around the edges and you have to crack it off, then this is like the worst shape you can possibly have for potentially rounding these off, because obviously it's very, very close to round when you get these little 12 pointers. So if you do get a stubborn one, you're using that kind of tool, that unfortunately can round them off. If you're worried about whether it's stubborn or not, what you can do is just grab yourself a size 11 socket, put that over the top and just undo it a little bit, so you can see it's just facing just off centre. So if I move, there you go, move it just a fraction. Yeah, you can see I've moved that around. Do it again for you. There. So now you can see that the flat's facing us. I haven't actually cracked it open yet. There we go. But if you're worried about it, that's the way to do it, with a good socket, because that will give you full grip. Ideally, once you're happy, obviously you can use any type of spanner that you like to do it. They do these special spanners that are kind of 6.5 sided, if you like, and 4.5 sided, and they fit around it quite nicely and also allow you to work around the pipe. If you've got a ring spanner, put that on first. Once you know that it's definitely going to open, pipe on the top, and then we'll open this up. Just put the pipe over the top. You need to make sure you get a nice tight fit, like so. Now ready to slacken it off a little bit. There, you can just see the fluid just starting to come up out of the pipe there. So now what I'm going to do, this would have freed up this brake pad, so in theory, there you can do it with your hands. I can retract the caliper like so, and then I've got to do it before the air gets back down into it. Yeah, we got it. there. So before the air gets down the pipe and gets back into the caliper, you want to make sure that you've closed it off, like so. So that's that one fully retracted, and obviously the excess fluid has just gone straight into a bottle down the bottom there. And if you found that when you've squeezed them back, rather than them going flat, you've kind of created an angle. So you can see that's, yeah, pistons aren't pretty good actually. But what you can do is you can put a flathead screwdriver in there, just put a bit of pressure on it, then we're going to release this and just level that brake pad off with that kind of last motion. May or may not be required. Keep the pressure on it, and then as soon as you open this, yeah, it'll start to come straight out, like so. And then just close it off. Again, not letting the air come back down the pipe. Perfect. And then obviously what we need to do is just repeat the process exactly the same on the other side. You can see that they've opened up a really nice gap there, fully retracted, and the pad's now nice and loose. So exactly the same process, get this one pushed back as well. So now with the pistons retracted, both pads nice and loose, so these can just be slid out. So there's the old set of pads. So if your pads aren't as worn as these ones are, you've got the wear sensor. If your new pads that you've bought don't come with these, you can reuse them, but only if they haven't been worn through. What happens is once these little sensors wear through, they wear through with the pad. Once they wear through, it breaks the circuit, and you have to replace them. They can be removed. They're a bit of a fiddle. If you kind of get all the dirt out of there, give them a bit of a wobble, you will be able to get those out. But like I said, if they have cut through, and the brake light is on this car, but I don't know whether it's the front or the rear. We're doing both on this particular car. So in this instance, I get rid of these anyway. We're going to be replacing these, but they are reusable. As long as you haven't had the brake pad light come on, you definitely should have no problems reusing those if you need to. So to be able to remove the brake disc from the hub, we've now got to remove the entire caliper. On the Audi Q7, we have a setup which is not particularly common. Usually you'd have a flexi hose coming off the back of this caliper somewhere, that obviously goes up underneath the wheel arch. Unfortunately on the Q7, as we've got here today, you've actually got this fixed brake line, which makes things a little bit more difficult. Normally what you do is you just unbolt this, 2 bolts on the back, and then you can literally just put that to one side, tie it up with a cable tie or a bungee strap or something like that, and carry on working. Because we've got this brake line, it's a little bit more difficult. And now what we'll do is we'll go through the setup of this, but basically all there is an extra bracket that we've got to work around on this particular caliper. So we have this fixed brake line, and if you follow it, you can see it actually comes up and it does change into a flexi hose. Just here you've got this coupling here, and from here upward is the flexible hose. So that's going to give us the freedom we need to be able to manipulate the caliper. So we need effectively this section here needs to be freed, and so what they've done here, they've actually made this whole section is a bracket. You see it moving there, and just down in there, you've got a little bolt that goes through and attaches onto the front, onto the rear of the arm there. So what we need to do is take that out, and then that will allow this whole bracket to pop out. And then, of course, what you've got then is you've got the flexibility of the top half that's going to allow you to manoeuvre the caliper, whereas if we try to leave this in place and move the caliper, obviously this line's not going to move at all, so you're going to end up damaging it. So what we're doing is by removing this bracket, we're removing the stress from this line onto the flexi line, and of course on the flexi line, no problem, it's flexible. So let's do it. Okay, so in my case here, I can see I've got quite a lot of dirt and gunk built up in the head here. It's like an Allen key hex head, so I'm just going to give it a bit of a scrape. So I want to make sure that I get that tool in as deep as I can so I don't round anything off. Just going to give that a good scrape out, get all the dirt out, and I'm just going to give that a quick spray with the dismantling fluid, liquid wrench we're using today. It's a size 6 hex. It's got a little bit of corrosion in there. sure that's fully seated. Now you should find this whole bracket is loose. You should be able to pull it out like so. And that's going to give us the freedom that we need. So on the rear of the caliper here, we can see that it's held on by these two large bolts just here. Again, just to help us, we're just going to put a little bit of the dismantling fluid. Top and bottom. Let's give that 5 minutes to soak in. So grab yourself a breaker bar or an air gun if you've got one. Size 21. Just crack those off. Okay, so that's your bolts there. What we're going to do, just also remove the second one, just put that back in like that. There's the second one. Again, I'm just going to pop that back in just for 1 second. So on these particular discs, we've actually got this little safety bolt that stops the disc accidentally falling off. If yours doesn't have this, or as an added double safety measure, what you can do is just put your wheel bolt just in like that, and then when we remove the caliper, should this be loose, or maybe this bolt be broken or something like that, this disc cannot fall from the car and land on your feet. It's just an extra safety thing, well worth doing. So now the disc is safe, just carefully remove your two bolts, remembering to support the weight of it, so we do have a fixed line. So find yourself somewhere suitable. To add your cable tie or your bungee strap, just so you can ensure the weight is not on this fixed brake line. That's good, yeah, happy with that. And that's all you're doing, is just finding a suitable place to strap it up. Just so you can ensure that all the pressure is on the flexi part of the brake hose, not on your fixed part just there. So this particular one is a Torx size 50. This is where if you've got a impact gun, definitely use it, because you have to counter hold against the screw. Can be a little bit fiddly. Doing this the manual way today. That's what most people watching will have to do. And there's the little screw there. So right now the only thing that's holding the disc onto the hub is our little safety bolt. And ideally you always want to put this kind of as close to the 12 o'clock mark at the top there as possible. So as we can see, our disc is fairly well stuck to the hub there. So we're going to have to get the hammer onto this to tap it off. What we'll do, before we fit the new disc onto the car, I'll give you a little tip on something that you can do to help prevent exactly this scenario that we've got here, when the disc sticks onto the hub. Can be really annoying, and sometimes can be really hard to get off. Hopefully this one won't be too bad, but we'll show you how to avoid this in the future. Then just carefully take the weight of the disc and screw your bolt, and then we can get rid of the old disc. So what you can do is just grab your copper grease, and you can just add a really thin layer to the whole of this face, including the outsides of the little support arms just here. Nice thin layer, and what this will do is basically just creates that little layer that will stay there. So next time you come to remove this, you'll have this layer, and all you've got to do is break this layer rather than so this will stop any kind of corrosion building up or any rubbish getting in there. And this should help prevent your disc getting stuck the next time you come to remove it. Okay, so a quick look at the new discs we have here. The brand is Genius. I'm not familiar with this brand, I've not used these before. Okay, so yeah, I think. Yeah, no need to apply brake cleaner on these. I thought so when I saw about the coating. Usually what you'll find is your brake discs, what they do is they actually apply a very thin layer of grease to them to stop them rusting whilst they're in the bag. So when you open it, you've got a nice fresh shiny brake disc ready to fit. These particular ones don't need it, so what we'll do is we'll show you a clip of a different brake job that we've done, showing you how to properly clean up your brake discs using brake cleaner. So when it comes to brake discs, they almost always come vacuum sealed like this one, and inside here they actually coat this with a thin layer of grease. The reason that they do that is to keep it nice and shiny in the packet. You don't want to open your brand new box and find a brake disc with surface rust on it, so they cover it all with a fine mist of grease. And you obviously want to get rid of that because your brake pads are actually slightly absorbent, so if they've got grease on it, they'll actually soak that grease into the faces, and obviously that's going to have disastrous consequences. So you need to get brake cleaner and give the complete face of both faces, front and back, of your brake disc a really good clean. You can see it gives you an idea of how much grease they put on these. It's always a good idea to do the outside first, because this bit, it doesn't matter whether you get a little bit of grease on that. In actual fact, we'll probably grease that before we put the wheel back on with some copper slip. So when you turn it over, there might be a little bit of grease in there, but this will keep this surface that we've just cleaned up off of that grease. You see on this side, I don't know whether it will show up on the video or not, you can really see the grease kind of shining in the light there. Okay, easiest way is to grab yourself a wheel nut, identify whereabouts your little locking pin is going to end up being. So obviously we want to make sure we try and align that. I find it's usually a bit quicker and easier because you've got a lot more play, length in the wheel nut. It's a lot easier just to pop that on, just to hold that safely. That's definitely not going to fall off, and then we can concentrate on getting the locking nut back in. So your little locking bolt has only 15 Newton meters. You can torque that up to spec with the torque wrench if you like. 15 Newton meters isn't a lot, so it's basically just enough to hold it into place. So just tighten it, but don't over tighten it, you'll be absolutely fine. So before we refit the caliper, now's a good time to check the condition. We had a quick look at the rubber seals down the sides of the brake pads whilst they were out before we retracted them. So again, you just want to go around and check the general condition of the rubber seals and the pistons, make sure everything looks okay and you're happy with everything. Any dirt or whatever, get your wire brush in there. And give those a bit of a clean out. Now it's just a kind of a perfect opportunity. Again, if you're using the wire brush, be careful. Again, talking about these rubber seals. You don't want to be damaging those. But now's a really good time just to give it a bit of a wipe over. Just get rid of some of the worst of it. These aren't too bad. Get rid of some of the worst of it. So you've got a nice open view of them. The other point that's quite good to give a quick clean off is where the caliper, just on here where the face, where the caliper bolts on. You've got the metal face here and a metal face there. It's a good idea just to give these a quick clean over. And likewise on the inside of the caliper, we've got exactly the same thing. Yeah, we've got some rubbish around there, so just give them a quick wipe over as well. Make sure you've got one of your caliper bolts ready to go. Take the weight of your caliper and cut your cable tie, or remove your bungee strap, get rid of that. And carefully manoeuvre the caliper around. Get it to its approximate position, and then we're going to get one of these bolts in. Let's get it started. There it goes. Just so we know that it's safe. And second bolt in. There we go. So now you want to get those tightened up as far as you can, and we're going to torque these up to a factory spec. The other thing to mention real quick whilst you're doing these is that ideally you should replace these two bolts every time you replace the discs, every time the caliper's taken off there. They do go up to a high torque. So it is recommended in the workshop manual to replace them every time. Not everyone does that, and today we're not. We did actually order some in, they haven't come in, they're out of stock. It's going to be out of stock for 2 weeks, we can't wait that long. So you'll see most videos on YouTube, people will reuse their old ones. It's not an uncommon thing, but the Audi Workshop Manual, of course, does recommend that you do replace them every time. But that's at your own discretion. But of course, if you've got any, if you're unhappy with the condition of the heads, if you've got any rust or anything on there, and you think that they might not last very much longer, then of course don't refit them. Only refit them if you're happy with them. So these need to be torqued up. Factory spec on these is a ridiculous 270 Newton meters. And yeah, that figure is correct. Checked, double checked and triple checked. So they do need to go on very tight. Okay, so next what you want to do is just manipulate your bracket a little bit and get the hole in the bracket aligned with that little threaded hole, and obviously put that screw, replace the screw back in there. There's no specified torque for that, just get it up so it's nice and snug. Another good idea, if yours were a little bit tricky to get out, what we're going to do is we're going to ensure that the holes here are as clean as they can be, and we'll also be cleaning up the pins before we refit as well, just to give a maximum chance of getting them back in as easily as we can. Okay, before we refit the new pads, you see we've got like 3 sections, and they correspond to where each of the 3 pistons fit on these particular pads. On the back they do come with this little pad, which should stop them from binding. However, it's always a good idea to add a little bit of your dedicated brake grease. You can buy great brake grease from any automotive supplier, and use these for various jobs around your brake system. So it's a good idea, as we're going to do here, just to apply a light coat, and that will help prevent anything binding to the actual back of the pads here. Be careful not to touch the faces of the pads. They are absorbent to grease, and obviously you do not want grease to be soaking in to the faces of your brake pads. So it's given a bit of a wipe over. It's only a thin layer that you need. That's plenty. And obviously repeat that on both. The other place that you might want to carefully put a little bit is when you look down to caliper, you've got those like 4 metal pins, 2 at the top, 2 at the bottom, that sit either side of the disc. And just in here is where these touch those. So I'll put a tiny bit just on there as well. again be careful not to get them near the face of the pads, and then repeat the same on the second pad. So we'll start by fitting the first pad. This pad is the one that has the cable attached, and this is just long enough to reach back to your plug, whereas obviously if this went onto the other side it wouldn't work. So make sure that you're installing this one to the inside as we are here. Just carefully feed them down. That's one. Same process for your second pad. Yeah, perfect. So we've just added a little bit of our brake grease just to our pin because ours was a little bit tricky to get out, and we've got our spring clip ready. So it's a good idea to grab yourself something like a punch, and so you can press the, give you a little bit of manipulation, because the springs can be very, very tight. So I'm almost at a position ready to tap this in. So what I'm going to do in a second, I'm going to grab my hammer, I'm going to push down on there, compress the spring so that lines up, I'm going to tap it on the end. One thing to note is, you see this has got two flat edges. If you come around to the side, you see it's got a rounded head, but it's flat on the top and on the bottom, and obviously that needs to seat correctly into that. It's like a slot. Perfect. You see we've closed that gap up completely, and we're through everything as we should be. Everything's looking good. You can still manipulate the clip if you like. See, it wasn't quite centered, it was off to that side, but you can still move it by hand, get it exactly centered so you're happy with it. So now you've got the little bolt that goes in the end here, and you want to torque that up to factory specification. Again, you might need to check that, but on the car we're working on today, the Q7, it's 30 Newton meters. So now we just need to route our two cables. This one's easier to start at the far end. That one in there. Next, you've got this little kind of hoop around next to the brake nipple there. Feeds in like that, and then finally you've got this little cutout, and what I'm trying to do here is kind of get the spacing even, so rather than having it really tight there and having a load of leftover there, trying to space it out evenly between them. And likewise here, we don't want that pulled tight, we want a little bit of leeway there for it. That's it. Just make sure you're happy with everything there, and that's the first one. Okay, so on your second one, we've got a little cutout in the disc itself, just down in there, and this is the connector. The thick part, so you obviously got a thin part, a little metal slot, and then the thick part. The thick part is the brake pad face side of it, so that goes towards the inside of the centre of the caliper. You can always cross-reference that against your other one there. You see the thick side is on the inside, facing the centre of the caliper. And make sure you've got both the bleed nipple caps securely back in place. Okay, now on the Q7 here, on the Audi Workshop manual, it recommends that when you finish this process you do a full brake bleed. The brake bleed interval on the Q7 is every 2 years anyway, so that might sit quite well with you know, how often you're doing your brake jobs or whatever. So one thing to bear in mind is if you did this properly, when we actually applied the pressure to push the fluid back out of here, we didn't let any air come back down in. So as long as you didn't have air go in, there should not be any air in your system. So in theory, and we've only used a little bit of brake fluid just to compress those. So in theory, you could go back up to your back into the engine bay and just top up your brake fluid level. But it's always a good idea to do a full brake fluid change, and it's not that complex on these at all, and we're actually producing a full video on that process. I'll have a link for you below in the information section, so if you want to check that out. But that is the Audi workshop recommendation, and we'll leave it at your discretion as to whether you do that or whether you just top back up. So now that you've got your pads in place, what you should do is you should hop into the car, and you want to compress your brake pedal a couple of times. Don't push it all the way down to the floor, just use short strokes, pressing down about halfway, and that will just seat these into the correct position. It will reset all of the 6 pistons per caliper, get that all nice and tidy. Once you're happy that that's been done, you want to take the car for a short journey, just revert ideally backwards and forwards just on your driveway, just testing that the brakes feel okay before you actually drive the car. Assuming that they feel okay, take it for a short drive around the block at low speeds before you go and take it on the motorway or the highway. Just make sure you're safe, make sure you're happy, and the brakes feel good and responsive as they should. So if this video has been helpful for you, before you leave, please be sure to hit the like button, that's the thumbs up, and also be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have literally hundreds more videos dedicated to Audi, so please do check that out. Thanks for watching, we'll see you again.